So joining us this week, we have another guest coming from New York. We've had his brother on about a year or so ago. He was a producer from Arrow Video, Michael MacKenzie. And this week we're going to have David MacKenzie, who runs one of the most important things I think when it comes to our discs. He runs his company, Fidelity in Motion, which is all about encoding and authoring. David MacKenzie, how you doing, man?
Pretty good. Technical difficulties in this end, but apparently I'm a little dark, but apparently we're here. That's internet video for you, right?
Yeah, man. You know, like it's like I was telling you, like so. I just want to get your words. We don't need it to be perfect video, but it's okay. We're here. We got this going. I'm always honestly when we do these interviews, a lot of times my side's the technical difficulty, so that could still happen because my internet's terrible here. But
you look positively pristine compared to the video I have, but
well, it's okay. It's okay. I'll CGI you later.
There you go. Yeah. Do it, George.
Oh yeah, we're gonna use AI just to completely change you.
It's too soon, man. Too soon. We're still in the middle of strikes, man.
I know, damn it.
But I'll always like to start just in general. How you doing? How's the day today?
It's busy. Good complaint to have. We've kind of reached the point with UHD Blu-ray where the independent labels were, I think, skeptical of it's not a new format, it's an evolution of a format. I think we're past that point now. But UHD is a lot more work. It's a lot longer. It takes longer to do anything. I'm feeling it.
Yeah. I was going to say, man, you know, I've been kind of chatting with you on email for a good chunk of time, give some months, 6 months or so. And when I first, I think, contacted you, and I'd hear from you, and then I'd lose you for a few months.
That's just me playing hard to get. Come on.
Well, yeah, I figured that. I was like, he wants to come on, but it's just he just wants to make sure how hard I want him to come on. And I kept going, and then we got this done. So that's great. And but this is a side of the whole physical media that I think is kind of unsung, because it's almost the most important thing, other than, of course, the restoration, like restoring the movies. But then this is about getting the most out of the film on disc, plus some other things, of course, that you can explain, because this is something that I'm not super educated in. So please tell us, like, in general, what's kind of the job that you do for physical media, and how your company, Fidelity in Motion, started.
Well, what we do, the encoding and authoring processes are kind of, in the analogy, gathering ingredients to bake the cake out of. So forgetting the compression side for a moment, the actual authoring is taking a whole bunch of assets, audio tracks, subtitles, video, menus, and kind of just arranging it all in a way that the standard Blu-ray player can read. What's the code that executes when the disc is first put in, the code that's attached to all the menu buttons. That stuff on its own is not that exciting. And of course, the compression is the actual reduction in file size, bandwidth reduction that's necessary to serve up a high quality movie in a way that will actually fit onto a disc, even a high capacity disc like a BD or a UHD BD, 25, 50, 100 gigs. That is nothing compared to the file size of uncompressed video, which is just insane. So all that work goes towards basically creating a package that standard consumer set-top disc player can make sense of and spit out to a screen.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of monotonous work. Sounds like a lot of just.
Well, it's I would call it monotonous, but that's because I love this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, like, it seems like it's something that's very detailed, or like you have to really sit. I mean, for me, sitting in front of the computer for too long, it would become, because I used to do a lot of video editing, and now I look back at that time and I'm like, I don't know if I could do it anymore. Like, I just sit in front of the computer for so long and doing all that
keep
work.
In mind, I grew up in Scotland, where you can't go outside, but the climate sucks. So I was an indoors kid. So I mean, I certainly would call monotonous because even now, AVC, like the video compression standard we use in standard Blu-ray, is pretty mature by this point. We kind of, after you've done enough of these, enough jobs, you kind of get feeling for what like textures, what kind of film stock, what look of movie is going to need what done to it, like what settings. HEVC continues to surprise us. So, yeah, no, it's still keeping us on our toes.
How's the collaborate like when when you're working with a label, you're working with an Arrow or working, and it comes to a certain type of film, are you collaborating with them about what they're trying to go for with making sure that the image looks a certain way, or do you just kind of do something and then give them?
No, I mean the way that the guy who introduced me to the whole Arrow team was James White, who's of course their restoration expert, and it's not the whole job is preserving the intent of the master, so it's not so much that there's any question about what it's going to look like. That's really a job to the colorist and the restoration team. Our job is to compress it in a way that when I'm explaining this stuff to people who have like no clue what I do, they probably still don't have a clue after I'm done talking.
It's me.
Well, I always tell them that the whole job is the kind of elevator sales pitch is to. It's late on Friday, so I'm going to slur my words. I apologize. The whole point is to compress the master down to 99% of the original file size, but keep it looking 99% as good. So, and that's possible with the compression standards, that we have today. You can do a huge amount of bandwidth reduction, even though from a consumer standpoint, you don't think of BD as being a huge amount of bandwidth reduction because, everything compared to streaming, it's still all these uncompressed video is huge. So these are all still highly compressed formats. And obviously, like I said there, like I alluded to, the amount of bandwidth reduction needed to get onto a network delivery it's getting better, but it's even more so.
On our show, Andrew likes to always bring up the importance of encoding and when there's a new release coming out, whether it's had that kind of upgrade that you're looking for with a new release. So it's
a lot of people don't pay attention to those details. Even like just, us savvy collectors don't pay attention to those details as well.
Because they don't know what it is.
I mean, there is no like,
and the audio stuff.
Yeah, but even like when it comes to video details.
Audio, sorry to jump in there and talk over you on your own show. Audio is very different because you can have lossless audio now. That's manageable. Maybe not for like multi-dimensional stuff like Dolby Atmos, but for 5.1, 7.1 stereo, whatever, you lose nothing unless it's like an intentional decision that some mixing engineer wants to like do a different mix for the home. But you compared to the theatrical, you don't lose anything with audio. But we are so far away from that point with video that what uncompressed video is, it's ridiculous anyway. It wouldn't make sense, but. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I was just saying that there is no like education program available that teaches you about it. The way I learned it was just listening to people talk about it and then just like looking at my disk information. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like certain websites would break down the technical aspects of it. They would show like bit rates and what is a bit rate and what is all those things. Why does the bit rate matter? Why is this number being bigger mean less compression while the number being smaller mean more compression? What does more compression mean versus less compression? How does that affect the quality of what you're seeing on screen? And then you kind of expand out when there was that whole transition from DVDs to Blu-ray. What's the difference between standard definition and Blu-ray and high definition, and then the different discs? The old DVDs were different types of discs. The new Blu-rays were different types of discs. They could store more information because HD is a bigger file, bigger video unit, so it needs more space in order to breathe. That's why you need the higher compression for the video to breathe more. And that's why kind of when you put an old DVD on like a high definition television, you notice a lot more compression issues. I remember that being a whole issue when it came to cable television. when you had to make a conversion from your old standard definition cable television set top boxes to new HD set top boxes. People didn't realize that you couldn't just plug in your own stuff and it would look good. It looked terrible.
Right.
It's like you had to make the transition because the technology is so vastly different.
And also, the I can certainly talk to us from having worked with display manufacturers as well. The display manufacturers didn't do themselves any favors, considering all those all the preset modes really kind of went for the brightest picture possible on flat panels. And when you have a signal that was designed for the CRT days, viewing it like a peak of 80 or 100 nits, every imperfection is lit up like a Christmas tree. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's still an issue today, and it's 2023, where the preset picture quality settings on your brand new $1,000, $2,000 TV are usually not great. They go for the brightest because they assume that people want to see big, bright, bold colors, but they're not entirely accurate to what the color scheme is supposed to be. Especially when it came to the difference back in the day between LCD, plasma, DLP, which is kind of a dead technology now, and then of course the new age of stuff is LED, OLED, stuff like that. It seems like there's such a vast change in
I always
display technology.
One thing I can say from my days of reviewing hardware over HDTV tests in the UK, I refuse to call them LED TVs.
Okay.
They're LCD with LED. You know this.
I
Of
may
course,
have
LCD
insulted you.
backlight. Oh no,
It-
not at all.
but
But
you-
that's the whole marketing thing. Of course, I remember being at IFA in Berlin one time, and Samsung were making a big deal of how the fact that they invented the segment of LED TV, and it's like, well, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Well,
that causes so much confusion now
Oh
that
yeah.
now that we have you could consider OLED an actual LED TV. And like the confusion out there, if you want to talk about like just confusing the pants off consumers, ask the average person in the street what the difference between LCD and LED and OLED is. And of course, like the LCD manufacturers jumped in with stuff like QLED, and
Yeah.
They got
all these
fancy.
other rebrandings.
And
Anyway, sorry, I'm going for a
it's the
tangent.
same. No, trust me. This is all stuff that's been melting in my brain for years, and I've had no one be able to talk about it with until this moment in time.
Yeah.
Because every time I go to like a Best Buy or a store that has the TV setup, I always go there to check out one, what the prices are looking like, because I like to keep track of those things, and two, like what are the things that they're coming out with, the different companies. I know LG's been trying to push an 8K TV now for a couple of years, and I'm like, this isn't going to sell. You can't really sell people for 4K, let alone
Well,
um
also the thing that I don't like about that is that video on a digital display always looks best when the pixel mapping is 1-to-1.
right.
So your whole collection of 3040 by 2160 UHD Blu-rays is going to look at its best on a 3040 by 2160 display.
Like,
If you scale it, you're either going to introduce blurring, rigging, aliasing. It's au naturel is the way to go.
yeah,
The exception there, I would argue, is if you have such a big display and you're sitting really close to it and you can see the pixels. Like, have you seen those those 90-inch 1080p LCD TVs?
yeah.
You can see the pixels of that size, and you could argue, make the argument there that okay, it's better to scale it onto a higher res panel than tolerate that. But when was the last time you sat in front of a UHD at the 4K display and thought, "Wow, look at the pixels"? That doesn't happen. But
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't happen, and I understand exactly what you're saying because it was the same principle kind of when the whole up conversion thing started happening, when it came from up converting um up converting standard def to HD, where you could buy a Blu-ray player, put your old DVD in, and it would up-res it to, high definition, but it wasn't really high definition. You're taking, a standard def thing and kind of stretching it, probably making it worse to fit a certain mold, uh, for the
yeah,
most part, and it really didn't
yeah,
quite
and
work.
that plays into what I said though, like because a big what was big in when BD was new 2008, big was like 42-inch, 50-inch TV, and a 50-inch display with a 720 by 480 pixel count would be not pretty to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the days where people were debating what the difference between 1080i wasn't 1080p and 720p. Basically, when we start, it was that whole late 2000s thing where the kind of HD revolution happened, and
It
it
was a
was a whole
fun
new
time,
world.
wasn't it? Like when nobody kind of, there were a lot more. I remember being naive at first, and when uh, sorry, my laptop just started yelling at me for the battery. I remember being naive at first and thinking, well, 35 millimeter film has a higher resolution than HD, so any HD transfer of a 35 millimeter movie is going to look great on disc. And then, of course, when we first start seeing catalog titles on HD, DVD, and BD, the quality varied quite a bit. And at first, it kind of felt like none of the enthusiasts were really sure why. That not all transfers were created equal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think that we kind of obviously you can speak more of this to where like different transfers all depend on certain factors. Certain factors of the quality of the masters, the age of the masters, the upkeep, whether it was from an original camera negative versus an interpositive versus several generations down the line. I mean, I think all of that you would probably say comes into play regarding how a movie looks in whatever disc format.
Yeah. And speaking of movies, of course, we also want to know about just your love of movies. We always like to get the background. So where did it begin for you? Obviously you just really you love this really tech stuff. The whole getting it on the disc and everything like that. But going to the root of it all, like, where's your love for movies start?
I'm going to ping that back at you, and it's hard for me to answer because I always have the feeling everyone loves movies.
I don't know,
Are
man.
you looking for like a childhood event, or like let me completely dodge your question with another
Okay.
question. That's you.
Yeah, I mean, it maybe. I mean, if that's where it started. I mean, did you go to the movies when you were a kid a lot?
Yep, a lot.
Yeah.
Well, one of my first memories is going to the cinema when I was little. Yeah, and it's such a hard question to answer. It's something we just grew up with.
Yeah.
So it's always kind of been there in the background, if that makes sense.
Well, so I guess the better way to ask you is, when did you realize movies were important to you?
Okay, that I can answer.
Yeah.
I remember being in the video store near where I grew up, and they had these little CRT, like little portable screen TVs mounted up high throughout the store. And they would always just play some new release on them. And at the beginning of one of I think it was an MGM title. I think it was like some sort of classics remastered, even back then, and this is the time of the 1990s release. And it had at the start of the tape, there was a little featurette about the restoration process. And the usual, the usual faces, and I'm sure Bob Harris was interviewed on it, and everyone like that. And they were going through it was like a sort of little 10-minute feature about the process. And I think that it was was it Battle of Britain or something like that? It was some kind of war movie. And it was talking, there were guys in the feature talking about how the previous versions had been kind of botched, and there was like the color timing, well, it's a black and white movie. The grading was wrong in one scene where the colorist had accidentally graded the scene for day, like to make it look like daylight, but there were clearly car headlights visible. And I was sat there, I was like 8 at the time, and I was sat there looking at this thing going like, wow, I didn't realize so much work went into this stuff. And the other thing they had in this feature, I'm sure this feature is on YouTube, by the way. Now, I'd love, if someone can find it, I'd love to see it again. They were talking about censorship stuff and how that they had been, in reconstructing this thing, they've been going through the all available copies, and there was, I think they said something like, when the movie got taken on just exhibited in smaller towns, they would edit the swear words out. And stuff like that. And but the thing I remember most is there was a shot of them opening some film cans. And the film, they showed a shot of opening this really decomposed, rusted film. And I remember even at that age, I looked at that, I felt sad. So I kind of weirdly came at it from a restoration preservation angle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it
That
seems
was-
like almost a sentimentalness to like.
I think so. I think film's precious. I know that in a way that like a digital cinema package isn't. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of goes into that kind of drives me.
Yeah, I think we all kind of go at a young age. We all look at film in a sentimental way, but I think the way that you did it was with almost like an awareness that is different than others. Like the awareness that it is precious, like you said, like
Mhm.
that thing that people made has a life to it. Like it's like if
Right.
it isn't, and if
It's
it
not going
isn't
to be
taken
around
care
forever.
of, then it doesn't have a life anymore.
Oh
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a romanticism or romantic fashion. I talk about in a kind of a general philosophical sense when it comes to the magic of cinema, the timelessness of cinema, all of those things. And for me, I brought this up so many times. Every time we've talked about reservation or preservation, I talk about These Amazing Shadows, the documentary about just the National Film Archive and just film preservation, all that kind of stuff. And I always bring up all of the lost film that has
Right.
just completely disappeared that we don't have access to. Mostly like 2/3 of the silent era is completely gone and stuff like that. And I feel like even we don't have the conceptualize that a lot of film from just the 20th century in general
Right.
would have been lost in the same fashion had the instance or the need to preserve and restore and conserve a lot of these things. I think of the special feature for the Godfather, where
Right.
Coppola said that they ran that first reel so many times that the film just broke.
It's fascinating, isn't it, just to think that no one thought. I mean, it's happening now with video games as well. Like now that those are increasingly moving online without a physical copy, and yeah, and once the rights holder or the content owner decides that it can't make money anymore, it's gone. Hopefully, they'll have copies behind the scenes, but I think the video game industry is way behind where movies were. But yeah, I mean, and the other obvious example is in the UK, like BBC, as recently as was it I want to say the 60s even, didn't think that any of their old shows would have value, so wiped the original master tapes. That it seems crazy now, but it's the thought process of the day. Save some money, tape over Doctor Who.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
I was
always
gonna-
the thought is always there is no forethought. Like there's no thinking
like
about
yeah,
people's
once we,
opinions might change one day.
well
You
they
know,
they
like,
didn't they didn't foresee the other ways in which they could make money from this. You know
Right.
what I mean? Home video distribution really wasn't a thing until the 70s at the earliest. I might
Yeah,
my guess.
late 70s, I guess. When did
Because I'm
magnetic
thinking,
video start? When was that?
I'm trying to think of when like VCRs and Betamax players
Yeah,
were in
late
existence.
70s. Yeah, late
Yeah,
70s.
and then
Did
of
you
course,
read about the whole the industry had apparently thought that what eventually became known as Laserdisc would be the content delivery format. And if you read about the early forays into making Laserdiscs, it's kind of fascinating because the model was like vinyl records, right? And they thought if you could like stamp these things out cheap, then Laserdisc as a read-only platform is going to be what does it. And of course, what did they know? The VCR became the dominant way.
ironically, the VHS tape was kind of the lower quality of format of that time, and that ended up being the one to kind of have staying power and
I would
consist all the way
love
up to the 2000s.
I would love to do some technical comparisons with that. I wonder to what extent that's true and to what extent it's just a good story. Because what I see now, people, if you look at your YouTube comment sections, obviously the place to go for scholarly discourse. There's a sort of kind of Betamax syndrome where people like to believe, because it's a good story, that the superior format lost. So I've seen people say, oh, HD DVD was the better format compared to Blu-ray. It's tenuous at best, but I think people for some reason like to think that they like a story to tell that way. I'd
Yeah,
love to, but of course, in those days you had like, Joe Kane with the Video Essentials Laserdisc, actual test patterns available for your home video system. Was there a tape available to consumers with test patterns on it? There would obviously be engineering tapes and stuff, but I don't think there was. I don't think there was any way to actually compare the workings of a system back then. It was more. It was all. It would be a lot more subjective. Like
It'd probably be more uh, subjective, probably eye testing than more
right,
technical stuff. I mean, obviously now we have access to way more analytical technology than 40 years ago.
right,
And of course, like, time changes perspective, time changes facts, time changes all
right.
kinds of things. I mean, I mean, we're old enough to go through that whole format where, like you were just saying, HD DVD versus Blu-ray. A lot of people probably don't remember HD
Right.
DVD. How there was it got to be on such a big level that you had kind of studios or companies fighting against each other in terms of who was going to win that war. I remember Sony being on the side of Blu-ray, and then the other side was kind of like Toshiba. I knew was a big
Mhm.
HD DVD proponent. Even when it came to selling players and selling TVs and how they would market everything, certain companies, studio companies that were putting out movies, would put them out in one format versus another. It was, I mean, you just brought up video games. It was kind of like, a Nintendo versus Sega or PlayStation versus Xbox. You can only get this game on this format. You can only get this game on that format. That's the way it was for movies. Nowadays, not really like that. A Blu-ray
No.
seems to be that every company puts out a Blu-ray for the most part. You know,
Well, exactly. That format war should never have been able to reach consumers. It was so pointless. Some good came of it though. I mean, without competition from the HD DVD side, I think it's fair to say, and yeah, I think it's fair to say that without competition, there's a very good chance that Blu-ray would be stuck with MPEG 2. Obviously not in the UHD format where MPEG 2 would not cut it. But that really, having two formats wasn't entirely a bad thing from that perspective. I just wish that they had been able to settle their differences before releasing both, so we could have forgone the whole ridiculous format war. But
yeah.
it is
Hey,
what
I
it
mean, no,
is.
no, we need it. We need a movie out of it.
I mean,
We
yeah,
we got to
I
make
was
it now. We got Air with the Nike thing, and
yeah, BlackBerry, which is the BlackBerry, I didn't know in the 2000s was like one of the biggest phones on companies on the planet
I'm just
until Apple
picturing
came along.
I'm picturing some well-known actor being cast in the role of like a Japanese consumer electronics executive.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm
Right.
saying. We need the movie about the Blu-ray, the HD Blu-ray wars.
I
Like
mean,
we
they
need
just made a
that.
movie
I would
about
100% watch that.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
they
know.
just made a movie
Yeah,
about the making of Tetris. So
yeah,
I
the
mean, they could.
Tetris.
But
That's a good story. Yeah.
So I did want to ask about specifically encodings and codec and stuff like that because I bring it up several times around the podcast and it probably goes way over people's head because I cannot do a good of a job, explaining what it is because there's been so many different codecs over the years, uh, with MPEG 2 and then AVC and VC1 and then HEVC. And then we also had one for the 3D movies, for the 3D discs. So I wanted to get, I guess, a more expert, a more better opinion about how to break this down for people who probably don't know anything about it.
So codec is amalgamation of compressor decompressor. It's the code. These days, it's usually software. In the past, it would be hardware based too, especially in broadcast applications where it had to be done real time. It's the engine basically that takes uncompressed pixel data in. So values of value for Y, which is luminance, value for CD and CR, which are the two color difference channels, and finds ways to do the compression basically. That's based on exploiting redundancies spatially and temporally. So in other words, finding groups of pixels within the same frame that are similar to each other and approximating them based on that. And temporally, which is doing the same thing across time. So saying, hey, that block in that frame, like imagine a video sequence where a camera's panning or something like that. Whereas the uncompressed video would describe the entire pixel values for the entire scene over and over and over again for each frame, which is obviously leads to huge data, huge file sizes, huge bandwidth. The codec would compare blocks within the adjacent frames and say, well, okay, the camera in this scene is panning to the right. That block there looks just like that block from a second ago. take that, put it here, maybe change it up a little bit. Because it's very rare that you have a completely digital, just like it's very rare that the values are exactly the same across time. Usually in photorealistic content, there's some kind of I don't know, lighting changes or video noise or stuff like that. Does that answer the question? It's
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and of course the other end. That's that what I described there is like part of the encoder. The codec as a whole is the encoder and the decoder. So the whole process is essentially done in reverse on the decoder side to take the compressed bit stream and turn it back into uncompressed pixel data that can then be spat out over HDMI by a BD player, or if we're talking streaming, it all happens internally in the TV. But yeah, turning all those instructions basically on how to describe and rebuild the image back into actual pixel values is the decoding side.
Yeah, it sounds very much kind of like like technically interpreting video information for it to be able to be projected on a screen, whether it be a television or a computer screen or something like that. Kind of like taking the information and making it digestible in a format for it to be viewed. Because you're saying kind of but in a
Right. Well,
compressible way as opposed to decompressed.
you said the screen, which would be more the kind of domain of like the HDMI side. This is the purpose of the compression is more about getting the file size down to make it transmittable or storable.
Right. I guess I guess I was going one step further in kind of the cable, the HDMI cable is kind of which the conduit for all of that stuff to happen.
Well, I'm not an HDMI expert. I just know that it can be annoying when you have to get under the desk and fiddle around with the cable, which we never had to do with component video. But I think there are moves now. I don't think they've done it yet, but because the bandwidth of uncompressed video going down a cable like that is so big, there's now discussion from the HDMI people of doing the compression inside the cable.
Wow.
So instead of it's what with a system like BD, you have the player, the MPEG decoder, the ABC decoder, HEDC decoder, whatever in the player does the decompression and then spits out uncompressed pixel values over the HDMI connector. But I guess in this, I guess now the frame rates and resolutions, especially for like video game use, are getting so much higher. I guess it does make sense to do some kind of compression in the cable. Although I believe, again, not an HDMI expert, I believe what they would be talking about would be a lossless system. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone in the comments will tell me.
I know that they've gone through several iterations of HDMI cables over the years. They always give it like a numerical value, like 2.0, 3.0.
1.1, 2.1 instead
Yeah.
of just version 1, 2, 3, 4. But
I know they've done that over the years, and it's been very. I think laymen, like people, don't understand, and rightfully so because they make it all, I think, unnecessarily complicated.
Mhm.
And that's why I try to like break down the tech things for people, just because once you get it on a basic, simpler level, especially when you're talking about what's the difference between a $2,000 television and then $1,000 television. How can you make that digestible for people? I know they have people in stores to do that, but oftentimes they don't really know.
And also they also, I mean, what's worse than no information is incorrect information. So
Right.
it's funny though, we talk about HDMI, which I know is not the reason you have me on the show, but it is interesting to think that, I mean, it has been so successful. You remember back to like 10, 15 years ago, it was a bit of a battle to get people to in the in the US at least to connect their devices not using the composite video, the yellow the RCA jacks.
Right.
Whereas HDMI now is just the thing you use to connect things to your TV. Similarly in Europe, we had SCART, which was more complicated. It could carry RGB video over though in the 1980s, which was pretty cool. But yeah, like untraining people, telling them like, no, like don't use this anymore. You have to use this new connector. I remember in the beginning, the early days of HD, that was a problem. Like you heard stories of people hooking up their HD cable boxes with the composite video, getting a 480i image out of it.
Oh yeah, I remember that very much as well. I remember also I like to track kind of like the evolution of the designs of televisions over the last decade and a half with the HD panels coming into frame. We talked a little bit about the LED, LED and OLED, and LCD and all that kind of stuff. But I'm also more interested in kind of like minute stuff, kind of
Mhm.
nerdy stuff. Like, do they include those jacks anymore? Some TVs don't. Do they include more than one HDMI port? Some have 6, some have 2. It
Right,
all depends
right.
on the company, the designs, all this kind of stuff, and it is all kind of part of the discussion tangentially a bit because we do need something to for the discs that we're talking about to be displayed on. And
Right.
sometimes that can matter. Your picture settings can matter,
Oh,
the television quality you have can matter,
110%. Yeah.
cables matter at in times, especially now with 4K a bit, um, maybe, but even now cables are relative. They're really. I've talked to many people over the years. There's kind of not a giant difference between $100 cable and a $20 cable.
Oh, well,
And
there's with HDMI, there's no difference. If it works,
yes,
it works.
that's what I've heard.
The only thing that muddied the waters there a little bit is I think the newer generations of HDMI, you know how if you had a bad cable or it wasn't passing the signal correctly, you'd see obvious defects like sparklies, like little misplaced color pixels of the image. Supposedly, some new implementations have they try and conceal that. So you could be in a position where you had a bad cable and you were getting subtle like degradation of the image, but not really.
Yeah.
I mean, HDMI has been a great equalizer with that.
Yeah, it
I've
seems
I've
like
got
more.
I've got cables from 2004 that work fine. That
Yeah,
there's no loss. It's hit or miss though whether or not they'll pass like 4K at 60.
yeah.
But if you're getting an image on the screen and it doesn't have an obvious defect, that's it. That's it. You've got all
Yeah,
of it.
what it is interesting when it comes to I mean, I think frame rate has always been kind of a thing that people have talked about over the years. Even when it came to theatrical exhibition, there were, remember, Stephen, there were a few filmmakers who wanted to do things in
D-
super high frame rate,
Peter
like
Jackson
Peter Jackson
came
most
back to
notoriously.
the Lord of the Rings franchise and did it with 60
Uh,
frames per.
yeah,
Is
and
it?
then even Ang Lee wanted to do like,
He did it with that one film, that military.
yeah, I think it was
Billy Lynn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Billy
yeah,
Lynn, and people really didn't like those things. It looked too photo real, It looked
yeah.
too.
It lost its cinematic flair,
It
like
takes
it.
away a little
Yeah,
bit of that
yeah,
cinematic sheen that is over
yeah.
because the 24 frames per second has been kind of standard now for a very, very long time.
My
I think
my
our
old
eyes.
right, well, no, like there's this issue always comes up when we talk about this stuff, and the whole kind of language of cinema has evolved around 24 frames per second. So you can't kind of just take that away and expect people not to say, wait a minute. My old colleague Vincent Teo over HDTV Test had a very good way of describing this, though. He said that the 24 frames per second, and I think he's completely right. The 24 frames per second rate of film makes it feel kind of like a dream.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
what's interesting is like the way the industry's moved on this. Like one battle that we always fight when we get archival bonus features, like for 80s and 90s movies. If we ever get like an EPK, like an electronic press kit as a bonus feature, we have to fight with whoever's handled it before. Like, don't deinterlace it. Like, don't like please let us up convert it, because a lot of the time you get well maybe you'll be able to get it based on the look I'm describing here with words. I wish we had like a video illustration, but if you think to like an 80s or 90s EPK, where you'd have like telecine film footage at 24 frames per second intercut with 60 images per second, like video footage of the actors like sitting in their chair in the set talking about the whole thing. That's like a really kind of powerful way of like intercut like that. You really see the difference between video and film. And then what happened was that when people associated the fluid motion loop with video, which was, I guess, more down market, more cheap in a way. And then when 24p capture and video came in, everyone started using that. So it's kind of weird how this stuff comes around. Now, what was considered, down market and not a sign of quality in the 80s and 90s, suddenly is being revisited by filmmakers. But I mean, what do you two think about it? Do
It all
you like the look of?
kind of all comes around when you
Yeah.
think about that.
Yeah, I've always been a fan mostly. I mean, I don't want to sound like an old fart, but yeah, the film look is just like it's not for people that that watch a lot of movies. Like we watch tons of movies. You can tell when something was shot on film or shot in 24, and it's noticeable to us.
Well, the way I have my television settings is when it's 1080p, I always want it 24 frames per second. Some TVs are automatically set to 60 frames per second. Some HD TVs.
Well, I was going to say that's one of the biggest battles when you're talking about like the watching of movies these days is what the TVs do to the image when it comes to like motion blur.
And the motion smoothing and all that stuff.
And every couple of years, the press will pick up on this. Like some filmmaker will see that and complain about it, and then the press will, like, you'll see these blogs put out articles saying like, here's how to turn off motion smoothing in your TV.
Yeah.
And what worries me about that is that, I mean, that is the most egregious thing, I think. But what worries me a little bit about that is, I don't want people to think that now that they've turned off motion smoothing that they're getting an accurate picture, because there's so much else that's going on. Like, I mean, out of the box settings are like, first of all, the whole picture's tinted blue. The white point isn't D65 where it should be. There's usually noise reduction on. In fact, you know what? Even when I worked in the reviewing displays and checking them for accuracy with HDTV tests and AV forums in the UK, one thing we'd find a lot is that the on-screen display of the TV would lie to you about what was going on. Like for the longest time in Europe, Samsung TVs, when there was a menu option that said noise reduction off, and it wasn't actually off; it was still on there low. And it was enough to, like, if there was like I remember the disc we always used was Gladiator. Which is 35 millimeter film, and a lot of it quite brightly shot. So there's always like a very light layer of grain on there. Well, the processing in that was enough to completely scrub off a light layer of grain. And I mean, the way the TV manufacturers think is not the same way as enthusiasts think. I think their concern at the time was, and it was only the European models, the US ones didn't do it. Their concern was it could be something as simple as one reviewer doesn't like film grain and they want good scores from that particular magazine or website now. So this is the way they ship TV. It's bizarre.
Well, the thing is to me, shooting on film isn't just about the look. It's about what it makes the filmmaker have to do when it comes to making decisions about making the movie. Like, they know that it gives them built-in limitations. They know that they're shooting on film. We can't waste a lot of it. So we have to make everything perfect the way we want it, like the first time. Like, and sometimes when you put that pressure on yourself, it makes you have to decide on something instead of giving everybody all the options in the world to do it over and over and over again and not waste a bunch of money. I think it's good to have them limitations, and I think it makes for better movies when you take some of the decision making out of your hands. Because sometimes you don't know what you want until you get into the editing room, and you're you know what?
That's true. There's the things that go into the making of a film that you can't necessarily see, but you probably can feel them in the final output, even if you're not consciously aware of them.
Yeah, that's how I've always felt. That's why I like shooting of movies on film, and just, we talk about it all the time about people, filmmakers going back and revisiting their material and deciding to pull stuff. And I'm just like, but that's how you felt at the time. Just leave it alone.
Right. I have to say I'm not much of a Star Wars fan. Like, I don't care about it either way. And I'm kind of glad about that, because it would frustrate the hell out of me if I was not being able to see the original versions of those movies. Like, those kind of knowing, oh, like here's a movie from the 1970s. Oh, and here's the inserted CG shot. It would wreck my suspension of disbelief every time I watched.
And it's gone steps further than that. I mean, even just like, more prestige filmmakers like the Coen brothers going back and pulling a line or two out of one of their films, like Miller's Crossing. They pulled like a couple. Yeah,
I didn't know that. No.
Little things like that where they're like making really like little adjustments. I mean, like, you can have your debates on like color grading and stuff. That doesn't bother me as much as when they start changing scenes by taking lines out or taking whole scenes out, or like, and it's like stuff like that I'm just like why? Like.
Yeah, I mean, recently the biggest debate regarding that, which we covered here a little bit on the show, on the podcast, is what they did to the French Connection, which was.
Do we know who asked for that?
I'm not sure that it's been
at
cleared
the
up.
time
Yeah.
at the time I saw one speculation that William Friedkin may have done it himself, but we never
Yeah.
got confirmation on that.
It just
Um,
doesn't sound like something he would do, though.
but it also just like if you watch the scene, it looks like there's just like a chunk of footage missing. So it's like
Yeah.
Because there is.
it's not like they
Yeah.
cut it to make it look like it meshed. It's like they just removed it and just
They
left.
just removed
you
that.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like
And
more
then
of a studio thing than it
and
was.
but and
You know.
the irony of that is it made people
Well,
feverishly go out and buy the Blu-ray where it
this
doesn't
is the
have that.
thing. Like, yeah, it's it's just going to draw more attention to what was there in the first place. But
Yep.
Yeah, but now it's like the only way you can kind of see that movie, I guess, in its original version or whatever you want to call it, is by buying the Blu-ray. And that's a movie which it has an interesting kind of history on Blu-ray because there's two Blu-rays of that,
oh,
and
I
they
remember
both
this.
look
Yeah.
diametrically different color-wise or color
Yeah.
tone and stuff like that.
One of them has the chroma resolution of a VHS tape, and the replaced version looks like a film.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
One had more, I guess, bright colors, not brightly colored, but like
Well,
exactly
one of
what you're
them,
saying.
the first one had the resolution of the chroma channels just completely blurred.
Yes.
I guess someone thought it looked cool. It's not for
It
me.
looked like
It's
the
not for.
70s.
It's not for me to say. It's it's there. I come to this stuff from a technical position, and if someone thinks that something that's technically lesser looks good artistically, a filmmaker thinks that, I can't argue with that. But
Yeah.
it is revisionist. That's not what it looked like in theaters.
Yeah.
So.
Again, they
Yeah.
do that. They and that's a debate I think Steven and I have had, and with in general, just when it comes to making these new restored, remastered discs and stuff like that, how far away are you straying from, like you were saying, the original look of the movie when it came out in the theaters? Because now, especially with new technology and just the new ways in which you can, remaster these movies and restore it, um, you can make them look uh bigger and better and brighter and all this kind of stuff better than ever. Should you do that, or should you just leave it the way it always used to be?
It's not clear cut, is it? Because
No.
Yeah.
if you wanted everything to look exactly like it did in the theater, you'd have cue marks, which I actually miss when I'm in theaters. By the way, I used to like tell them the time, like, okay, there's 20 minutes. 20 minutes have passed. There's a queued up. But no, I mean, if you wanted the disc to look exactly like it did in the theater, people would probably be disappointed because like the prints, the release prints didn't always look that great. Yeah, I mean, this again, this is one of the subjects that comes up a lot when we discuss this kind of thing. Being able to see a scan of the camera negative wasn't necessarily the final look of the movie. It's done because it's the best. It yields the best resolution, obviously. But being able to watch the technology has allowed us to watch just this direct scan of the camera negative with color grading applied to it. It will look pretty different to a lot of release prints. And it's in this kind of thing, just common sense, I think, and restraint and taste on the part of the colorist or the team that's making these decisions goes a long way.
Yeah. I
I mean,
I was gonna say through your experience, have you had like radical differences from like a before and after you've worked on? I'm not I guess we should get into what your work actually entails. We did a little bit about that, but I guess I wanted to, kind of further explain. When you're creating these discs and coding and all that kind of stuff, do you have it like on a monitor in front of you to
Mhm.
look frame rates and framings and stuff like that?
Yeah. So the stuff that we're talking about, like where revisionism can come into play, that's more the work of the colorist. So in compression, our job is to take the master that's been output from a color grading system, or if it's an older master, it'll have gone through some kind of studio videotape format first, and to reproduce that as closely as we can. So some badly set up encoding pipelines can subtly shift the colors and the brightness levels and stuff like that. It's kind of in the company name. The stuff we're using here doesn't do that. So the only kind of casualty of the compression process is very, very minute details that get dropped That's the magic that makes the whole thing tick. Dropping very very minute high frequency details that you can't easily see. So no, I'm we're not going in here unless we do some color grading work here. That's obviously different, but the typical compression work that we're known for, the look of the movie will not radically change.
Yeah. And I know I saw on your website. So once again, Fidelity in Motion. If you go there, you can check out everything that they do. You also do other things on the side, other side services like creating menus and things like that. Sometimes too. Is that some?
That's
design?
part of the whole. That's part of the
Yeah.
whole authoring process. The
Yeah.
creating menus, and I mean these days it's quite rare to have a per title menu. Usually, like Arrow discs all use like a similar template, which I actually designed that in 2013 actually. Yeah, it's pretty common now for labels that are releasing stuff that have a kind of template menu set up. But that's part of the authoring process, designing the menus, making sure all the buttons link up correctly. I think that tends to interest people. It certainly interests me less than the compression side because there's not really any kind of shades. Well, I'm sure I'll offend someone who just does disc authoring out there, but there aren't really many shades of good or bad in authoring, right? The disc either behaves correctly or it doesn't. Whereas with compression, you have more leeway to affect the finished result. And let's face it, you're watching the movie for the most part, not the menu.
Yeah. In the process, of course, one of the biggest things that happens to a lot of these labels that they all have to deal with at some point is the quality control. How do you go about making sure that what your finished product is ends up being properly authored and that there's no glitches or anything like that?
So most labels, sometimes we handle QC for labels. Most labels handle that themselves.
Yeah.
So it's a case of they'll look over and because they're the ones who decide hey, we want the disclaimer screen to show up after the commentary is played. That bonus feature needs a certain disclaimer at the start, at the end of it. It's on them to look for stuff like that. In terms of quality, there's some level of quality control kind of built into the encode process when you're checking the stuff. What the setup I have in my desk at work is a 65-inch OLED that I'm right in front of. And that's actually a little depressing in a way, because if you're that close to the screen and you're comparing the master and the encode, even when the encode is really good, once you look at this stuff, when you're looking at this stuff day in, day out, you can see the difference, right? It's not a massive difference. It's not the kind of it's really not the kind of difference that an average person would see. But you do lose some fine detail. That's the only way you can get a movie onto a consumer format. But yeah, like in that process, essentially just having a workstation feeding a big monitor and having it connected to high-speed storage, and then having a decode of the encode that's going to go on the disk sitting on a timeline above the master. You can turn the encode layer off and on and see, or do a difference view or a butterfly like split screen view to see how it compares to the source. So there's some kind of level of quality built into that. There's also the case of just player compatibility testing. Occasionally, you can run into some sort of thing where some player you uncover some obscure bug in some player. Like we had one title where there was a very long stretch of black, digital black as well, like zero video, like more or less 0 kbits per second. And that went on for like 10 seconds before it slowly faded up into the first scene of the movie. And when you upload stuff to or ship it physically to manufacturing, before the manufacturing begins, you get a check disc back. And the point of that is like they run off 10, 20 check discs, and that's kind of your last chance to find issues. And one thing we'll do, especially on high volume titles, is like check it in every UHD player in the market, more or less, to make sure none of them have a problem with it. And we found that one brand of player, after this long stretch of black, would kind of stutter and skip a little bit. It's almost like the thing went to sleep or something. We never figured out what it was, but the solution there was to stuff the bitstream full of zeros to get the bitrate up to like something above baseline, and that to solve the problem. There's just all these kind of things like this, and with UHD BD being a smaller field, there with each new format, DVD to BD to UHD, there are less players in the game. So,
Yeah.
and we were in there kind of more quite actually, I'll say yeah from the start. So we get to be the people who find these a lot of the time.
I
Yeah.
was I
Which
was actually just going to ask that, similar to what you're saying, is that, over the last several years, we've seen the technology change. We've seen formats have changed. We've gone from, like you said, DVD to HD about a
Mhm.
decade and a half ago, and now we're going from BD to UHD. Have you noticed kind of a difference in the process of your work, regarding that change? Like the difference basically between working on a Blu-ray disc versus working on a UHD disc. Is there a different process that goes into all of that because of it being a different thing?
Not real. Well, yes and no. No, the good thing is that UHD BD is a format extension to BD, so it's not a revolutionary new technology. The tools are they're evolutionary compared to the ones that were made for BD. The process of designing menus and authoring menus, it's not like the bigger jump was DVD to BD, where I don't know if you know how DVD was on the technical level, but you had all these concepts like the video title sets, it's been a while since they authored a DVD actually, so I shouldn't talk to that, but it was a different design compared to BD, whereas BD and UHD BD share a lot. The biggest challenges with the move to UHD, though, it's getting masters around. Like in the days of BD, when BD was new, like 06, 07, 08, typically you'd take delivery of a master on some kind of studio tape format like D5 or HD Cam SR, which is compressed in itself, by the way. The tape formats were not uncompressed. And then you would capture, going back to your discussion of HDMI, you would take your studio videotape, which had a compressed, but very high bandwidth compressed signal, could be like 400 to 800 megabits per second, which is a lot high quality for 1080p. Put that in a tape deck, play it out over an SDI connection, which would be uncompressed. So it'd be a similar process to what the player does, just on a different scale. Tape in, decodes what's on the tape, outputs an uncompressed signal. You capture the uncompressed signal to like a fast storage array, then compress that. These days, everything's gone file based, so the physical like videotape is not part of the equation anymore. Instead, you get like a high bandwidth QuickTime file on a hard drive or a download. But the file sizes of uncompressed are well, it's rare to actually get uncompressed video. You usually get it in a format like ProRes 4444XQ, which is compressed but very lightly. But still the file sizes are huge, and it's the old saying, with computers, 640K of RAM should be enough for anyone, right? This
No,
I just give it a
I'm
couple
just
years.
I'm just imagining the file sizes for like a 2-hour long movie
Yeah.
in that slightly compressed format must be
Mhm.
terabytes, like
Yeah.
terabytes long.
So like a typical 3040 with 2160 at 4444XQ ProRes, it's about I want to say usually it's about 1.5 terabytes. But uncompressed video in general, like whenever we describe the compression process, we're talking the file size of completely uncompressed versus what goes on the disk, because it's the biggest difference and sounds the most impressive. Like uncompressed, I forget the exact numbers, but uncompressed, uh, 24 FPS, 3040 by 2160, I think it would be about 8.5 terabytes.
That's a
Which
lot.
sometimes, yeah, it's yeah, and with some coding tools, you have to take in the master and then break it down to raw YUV uncompressed again. So with the move to UHD, everything is just more storage space, more download time, more surprises.
I was actually thinking that, and I wanted to ask you because it's such a large, like there's so much more information. The discs are also larger, and that you have to work with and stuff like that. It just seems like there's a lot of. It seems like the tools are similar to create this. It's just like the process is longer because you're dealing with so much more the information and stuff like that that goes into it. Um, But yeah, it's a heck of a process. I don't think a lot of people really understand probably the time it takes to create all of
Yeah.
this and just the amount of effort that goes
I was
into it,
gonna say,
which
the computer setup's got to be nice.
it's
To
got to be
do all
powerful.
that. It's got
It,
to be
Gotta be
very
real
it,
powerful.
powerful.
it heats a room very well when they're all running. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I did want to say, when it comes to credit and stuff like that, a lot of people don't uh, know that your company does all this work or other companies do all kinds of work. We bring this up all the time when it comes to the people who create the things you actually do see right away, and that's like cover art, the artists, and all that kind of stuff. And we talked a little bit off screen earlier about um, receiving the proper credit for all of this. Sometimes you can find it, but you got to search really, really hard on a lot of these releases. And
And there is a historical precedent for that, because if you think back to how the mass production process worked in the days of VHS and Laserdisc, or Betamax, since we're talking that far back, to like if you want to release a movie in VHS, you would have a warehouse of VCRs, like professional recording machines, hooked up to one studio videotape player, like D2 or Beta SP or something like that. Um, and that was there were people that had to make sure the machines were working, but it was a case of there was there was no interactivity, there was no authoring, but it would be more of a kind of just manual thing of like, okay, make sure that the master player is playing and make sure all the recorders that are recording off that are in record mode. That then walk away 2 hours later, eject the tapes, pack them, that kind of thing. So there, and for Laserdisc it'd be different form, a similar story with authoring and menu design and compression and stuff. That kind of added a step to the delivery process before the discs were mass produced at a factory, where there is, I mean, I'm not an unbiased source here, but there is an art to that. Like the decisions it's not on the same level as like making a movie. I'm not trying to claim that, but the decisions you make during the compression and authoring processes will affect the quality of the output. So yeah, there was you know where I'm going with this. There was not there wasn't a precedent to understand like the decisions made during that process, because originally there didn't have to be. It was only
right.
with the introduction of DVD where um, there was kind of more at stake with that part of it. I'm slurring my words here. I'm not
No,
putting it
no,
as
you're
clearly
you're
as I
making
should
a
be.
lot of sense.
It's late on
Basically,
it's late on Saturday.
yeah, oh, I feel you. Basically, kind of you're saying that when all of this kind of started, there wasn't really anything set up in a way in which to give proper credit for different jobs or different functions when it came to
It
producing
it
things.
it was more automatic, put it that way.
Yes, it
Like
was more automated. Yeah.
what you took from a master, like like again studio videotape format back then, Beta SP, eventually digital Betacam, and you recorded that onto VHS. There wasn't really, other than making sure that the levels were correct, there isn't really a lot of what you got recorded onto the VHS tape was what you would get, right?
Well, yeah, it is kind of goes to the fact of why VHS isn't the best quality format. As someone who's had to watch a lot of VHS rips of a lot of obscure horror films from the 80s,
Well,
I can
let
understand
me.
that.
Sorry, I'm gonna be the annoying
uh,
language police here. There's no
no,
such thing as a VHS rip, because a
so they
rip.
so they lied to me. They lied to me.
Well, a rip means you think of the. I mean, look, language evolves. I'm
Right.
but a rip in the I think the term first originated with CD, where a rip. The reason they called it ripping is because you were able to pull a direct copy of that data without any quality loss off of the original medium. And then with when it came to DVD ripping, the industry obviously put anti-piracy, anti-copy mechanisms in place. But with a VHS, like you can't. There's nothing to rip as such. You have to digitize it. You can't watch an analog signal on a computer, well, not without a digitizer anyway. But anyway, yeah. But you bring up an interesting point though, because one battle that we have a lot is when we get archive material from VHS or some kind of one-inch video format from back in the day, and it's not been handled correctly in capture. Oftentimes we'll get given something and it's really compressed, and we always go ahead and say, well, we need the uncompressed capture of the original source. Um, And the response sometimes comes back with, well, why do you care? It's VHS. It's never going to look good. And it's like, no. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. VHS is never going to look good by today's standards. But there's a big difference between direct digitization of a VHS tape without any extra compression applied, where all the video noise is there in its original glory, versus something that's been fed to the dogs or some automatic compression engine, and all that video noise has been eaten alive by compression, looks like wallpaper paste. So
Yeah.
what will ever look great? Not necessarily, but you always want the best starting point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off my tangent.
No, no,
No, that's good stuff.
No,
That's good stuff, because what is interesting is that not to get into the VHS conversation, VHS is making a little bit of a comeback amongst collecting enthusiasts. A lot of people are. I think they're more collecting them because of the retroness of it all, but the VHS cover box art. There was something unique about it. Oftentimes, it was
that's like nostalgia for an era.
yeah,
Isn't it?
nostalgia. It creates a nostalgia.
not really about the viewing part of it. It's
Although
more,
some people prefer the
some do.
VHS look.
Some
Right.
do,
Yeah.
Some people
There's-
like to watch certain
you know-
movies on VHS.
You know what? You always hear this with horror movies, like where you couldn't really see into the shadows that much, and everything was a little bit is this a family-friendly show? A little bit shitty
No,
looking?
we can say
Yeah.
you say whatever you want, man.
Yeah, you could say whatever you want.
If like if it didn't look great, that I've heard the argument made for a movie, like especially people in the UK who had to deal with that draconian, ridiculous, disgusting government censorship where they weren't allowed to legally watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've heard people say that their first experience of it was on like a couple generations bootleg down, which made it seem even more terrifying. It felt more like an actual snuff movie.
Yeah, it felt dirtier because it was illegal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I honestly think that's like a John Waters quote, but don't quote me on that.
A lot of that VHS look, though, it's not just VHS, because think about it. If you were able to, you could do this. We don't have time, but if we could do the experiment, output a beautiful new 4K, like feed a VHS recorder with a beautiful new 4K scan of a camera negative done with modern film scanning equipment, it would look a lot better than what people would consider VHS. So when we talk about nostalgia for an era, there's also a lot of that look. It wouldn't just be the VHS mechanism, like recording mechanism itself. It would be the telecine technology of the day. Back then, it was very rare to transfer an original camera negative because one, the density, the level dynamic range on that, the telecines of the day couldn't handle it, and two, there'd be no point because you couldn't see the extra resolution anyway. And also, I think the other reason is that one of the reasons that negatives started getting scanned more and more from one, there's like a preservation part of it, but also the machines became gentle enough to handle them. It's not a big deal if a telecine that's not been maintained in a while, like puts a big scratch down the middle of some print that's been strike another one. But obviously the camera negatives are replaceable. So
right, yeah, we have to really put ourselves in the mind of. I mean, Stephen and I are old enough to remember the old box televisions, CRT TVs, and all that kind of stuff. You can only do so much with that technology of the time, and I guess VHS really lent itself to that time frame. Really, it's kind of like now, you have 4K TVs. You want to watch a movie in 4K. You've got the 1-to-1 comparison right there. They go together like a glove. Yeah, I see a lot of people with retro setups when it comes to retro video gaming. They've got to get the right television set up and the right wires and all that kind of stuff to create the 1-to-1.
Well, that's
it's
an
an
interesting
experience. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting thing because, like, have you seen the meme that goes around that shows what kids these days think old video games look like, and it's like just obvious direct pixels. And then the right side of the image is, well, what they actually looked like back at the time was just smoothed out into this beautiful kind of glow with scan lines on it that the CRT TV would do for you. And you can make all these, I back then, like, I don't think the people designing video games were thinking of the artistic integrity of it. I know that's a conversation now because they've modeled that in the film industry. But yeah, like that pixel art was designed to be seen on, like I said, this a CRT, which is such a, by today's standards, such a weird display mechanism that lent its own look to the image. But
yeah, I mean everything. I mean, a lot of whatever entertainment industry is doing is it's all about retro, about trying to go back and revisit something and make it popular again. That's I mean, even in fashion, that's in everything.
Well, in a way, I would say kind of what we get into, Stephen, with the boutique labeling. We're seeing a lot of these old movies have these kind of not renaissance, but just like they're getting released on new formats. Like for example, Texas Chainsaw Massacre just got released in 4K
for its
twice this year.
100th time in its
Yeah,
history.
and it's
Yeah.
been re-released so many times in every single format possible, multiple times. But it's like they're always trying to bring things back from the past in a way, whether it's for monetary reasons, cultural reasons, popularity, whatever the case may be. And I think I kind of want to get an opinion here from David. Do you believe that UHD is kind of the final format for home video consumption?
I think so. In
Like, can we push this any
I
further than this?
of course. I mean, you can up the resolution and the frame rate and stuff. I mean, I preface this by saying I really thought the BD was the final format, and in a way, it is because UHD is an evolution of that. But if we're talking about like new players, new discs, I can be very cynical. I think you'd have it would be difficult to tell people, hey, you're gonna have to upgrade your stuff again. I don't know. Maybe when enough time passes, will people be open to 8K Blu-ray? I mean, my whole take on this stuff though is that obviously the CD industry and the display panel manufacturers especially drive this push for higher resolution because it's one of the things that's comparatively easy to do, and it's also a thing that the average person, the average buyer understands or thinks they understand. Everyone will most you ask someone on the street like what the most important aspect of a display is, they'll probably answer the resolution. I mean, I would say that's definitely not the case. There are other things that are more important, but the pixel count is something that's easily understood by people. So they'll always want to go higher and higher, but I mean, honestly, in some ways, like 1080p Blu-ray is a hard act to follow. I think you'll probably agree with me. There are certain UHD titles where it's like, yeah, okay, wow, that's visibly better. And then there are others, depending on the way it was shot, probably the lenses used, whatever. The difference is more subtle. I mean, one of the reasons that the industry in the first place even bothered with HDR is because they recognized that increasing the resolution alone would not be enough to make a compelling upgrade. Anyway, to get back to the question, I would be very surprised if we saw an 8K physical format, but I've been proven wrong before.
Right.
So,
Well, I know because Stephen, you think Blu-ray is pretty damn good.
I think for the most part, I don't need to upgrade most of my Blu-rays that are.
I agree. I'm the same. Like if there's let me this
Some of the older Blu-rays are
you get into the nitty gritty of it because it's like, well, if the existing BD is like an old telephony transfer of an interpositive done in the 1990s, and the 4K disc is going to have that's the thing about 4K, right? Whereas, sorry, I'm all over the place here.
That's the way the show. That's the way the show.
That's the way we are. Yeah.
The thing with 4K is the thing with HD is that studios had access to HD telephony and recording equipment years before consumers did. So if you talk to people, especially in Europe, where they didn't get broadcast HD TV for the most part until the mid 2000s, people will associate HD TV with the move, like the mid 2000s with the move to flat panel displays. But like Universal's classic example, they've been doing HD telephony. They had I'm sure they had a collaboration with Panasonic, I think, and they were doing HD telephony in 1994 with modified film transfer equipment. So those old masters done in the 1990s can make their way onto Blu-ray today. So just because consumers didn't have access to HD until late 90s, mid 2000s, doesn't mean that there aren't existing masters on the shelf that can be dragged out. Whereas with UHD, the move that was really more, I guess, driven by the consumer side. So the move to higher resolution that way kind of happened concurrently with the consumer space. Like, don't get me wrong, like studios were doing film scanning at 4K, sure, but it's not like there were decades or many years worth of existing masters sitting on the shelf to just pull off and
Oh
get
yeah.
ready. So where my roundabout way, what I'm saying is when there's a UHD release, chances are it's going to be made from a new master or a very recent one.
Yes.
Whereas with BD, you could be looking at something that's quite old at this point.
Sure.
So it's not just the disc, the delivery format itself. It can be what went into the mastering.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
really, what you got to look at is if the movie got a new scan or not.
Yeah,
you know,
I've been bringing that up a lot. Where there was a lot of Blu-rays that were put out in the dawn of the new format, 2007, 8, 9, 10, in that area, that desperately I think needed to be re-released because the technology has gone so far, because the ability to create new masters has gone so far, and all that kind of stuff. And they've been doing it ever so slowly over the last little while. I mean, we just talked about it, Stephen and I. The Truman Show just got released in 4K by Paramount, and that Blu-ray, that initial Blu-ray, came out in 2008, which was many moons ago.
And the master for that Truman Show was late 90s movie, right?
Yes,
1990,
98, 99, something like that.
The old master was probably made on earlier HD equipment for the DVD, and then down converted. So you're probably looking at the master for that before certainly looked like it was of the same age as the film, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know over the years now, since we've been buying Blu-rays, all that kind of stuff, there's been a lot of 4K remasters done and then coming out on Blu-ray. So it's kind of like you were saying, David, those 4K masters already exist. They just needed to kind of re-put it into a new format that could properly show that resolution, as opposed to kind of de-resing it down to like the 1080 from the 4K format. So they've done a lot of those over the years, and we've seen the difference between a regular 1080p master and a 2K and a 4K on a Blu-ray disc, and now we're kind of seeing in this new format what its actually capabilities are with the full 4K and the 4K disc. I've always kind of I kind of attack Paramount a little bit because they started their Paramount Presents line with the 4K remasters, but they were putting them on Blu-ray, and now just a couple of years later they're re-releasing those Blu-rays in 4K, and I'm like, you should have done this 3 years ago when these were coming out.
It's everything's a money thing, and I think at the time
I'm just mad about
people
Roman
were still
Holiday.
trying to understand the market for 4Ks.
Right.
So
because a lot of I had, when you were saying 4K BD's coming, get ready for it. There was a lot of people, studios were not sold. I mean, you go back to the days of DVD, and I've read news group posts saying like, HD TV, why do we need this? Why is this coming out? People on one side of the content production side of the fence often probably just feel, look, stuff's working fine the way it is. Why do you have to come in here with a new thing and shake things up? Every new format has skepticism like that. The initial complaints are always, it's too expensive. It's only home theater enthusiasts that want it. The title availability is not great. All you can watch on it is Hollywood blockbusters. And then eventually with time that the market solves that. So
the market always starts out high, big bubble, and levels down, now to the point where I remember when Blu-ray players came out, they were $1,000 a piece, and now you can buy them for $50 to $20. You know what I mean?
Yeah, $100
something like
right?
that. Yeah. That's usually $100 I would say is probably the better level to go with, but you can find them cheaper. But you see the market has come down. And that's the case with every new technology that comes out in every kind of area, whether it's televisions, whether it's video games, for the most part, even those they'll never come down seemingly. But it just feels like the new thing, and then it levels down. And the market kind of adjusts after a time, and it's adjusting now when it comes to UHD, when it comes to pricing for the most part. It
fluctuates.
It fluctuates, but I think the discs are coming down in price a bit. Same thing with Blu-rays.
Yeah. To get to wrapping up, I just want to go, step away from just all the technical stuff. Your love of movies, just like we talked about earlier about, where that started, but tell us a little bit about some of the things that are some of your favorite movies, some of your favorite things that you love going back to. What are you watching nowadays?
So yeah, what I'm watching now is usually the stuff I'm working on, and that's a very different experience to watching for
Yeah, of
enjoyment.
course.
Watching a movie to look for problems. Some of my favorite movies. I thought of this before I came to the show, and I kind of when I thought of the answers, I'm like, wow, I really am stuck in the early 2000s, aren't I? I love Mulholland Drive.
Yeah,
I was really happy to work in the European, the worldwide SKU for that.
the
Um,
Studio Canal
yeah,
4K. Yeah.
yeah, and then the BD before that as well. I love 2D animation. Spirited Away, I love. Um, Other favorite movies. I've not answered that question in a long time. If
It's
it'll come back to me.
it's tough,
The
man.
early
It can be tough.
2000s is a good time frame though.
Yeah.
That was
Does
a
it,
good time.
does it not feel it feels like to me that the early 2000s, and especially with the initial boom of DVD, was when I think a lot of us discovered like a lot of world cinema that we hadn't been exposed to before, and a lot of more like smaller independent movies that were really good.
Yeah.
Whereas does that still happen now? I mean, I can be very cynical and say it feels like what Hollywood is putting at the moment is a whole bunch of superhero stuff. I don't know if you guys are into
Well,
that.
I think what we're dealing with now is an oversaturation. I think
Mm,
there's too much material being put out in the marketplace, so then the gems get kind of buried with a lot
right.
of nothing, like a lot of
Yeah,
stuff that nobody's ever going to watch again.
yeah, a
It's
lot of the more independent, lower budget things, a lot of more the festival darlings and stuff like that do get buried because one, it's a marketing thing, and then you don't know where to find them to watch them. If you don't go
Right.
to the film festivals, if you're not in near a smaller independent theater that puts those out in exhibition, if you're only surrounded by multiplexes, chances are they won't have them. And then some of them don't get Blu-ray releases. Some of them um, barely get DVD releases, and if they do, you don't really hear about it.
Right.
They end up at Walmart sometimes,
Mhm.
just randomly when you're walking through buying things. I always find that to be kind of an issue. It's an information issue, I think. Like getting out and telling us where these movies are, how we can watch them. I don't think there's a lack of
but
interest. There's just a lack of
but
information.
but
You
I
know.
think that it is. I mean, even if you could get the word out on something, it's still. I think that the amount of material that's getting put out is just so overwhelming that people just
Well, you get
will
better,
look
yeah,
at it as
buried.
being just a blur. Like it's like
And of course, now there's with streaming services, there's now the threat that they can get a tax write-off by wiping the thing.
That's a
So
whole big thing right now. I know
that's
we're in the
you could
midst
probably
of.
do a show just on that subject.
Well,
But
the irony is
yeah.
that that does act. We've talked about that in relation to physical media over the last, couple of months or so, because a lot of the stuff that's getting wiped out doesn't even have physical media releases. Certain TV series, certain movies that were made specifically for whatever streaming service, they never saw the light of day, DVD, Blu-ray, whatever. And now that they're gone, you're left with nothing other than internet piracy, essentially. I mean, that's as sad as that is, and as illegal as that is. What options are left for people to consume those things?
What they love, if they like
Yeah,
something, it's
and they're doing it for, like you just said, financial reasons, so they don't have to pay things like, um, residuals and stuff like that, and renewing licensing
well.
rights to keep them on the service.
This is why
You
they
know,
should take a step back,
Mm.
only put money into things that they really like are behind, instead of just trying to
Instead of just shelling it
fill
out.
trying to fit. I mean, like
Yeah.
scattershot. Yeah.
honestly, and maybe this is a controversial one. I think out of the streaming services that seems to be doing it kind of the right way is Apple. Like Apple, of course, they're their own money maker. They make
Yeah.
they have
They
the
do have $1
finance.
trillion to work with.
They
Yeah.
do, but also they're putting out their mostly their own content, and it's not like so frequent that it's like you have no chance to watch the thing one
I know
thing
what you're
like
saying. I
it's
know exactly what you're saying.
they rent movies, they have renting on their thing, but then they have their own, all mostly their own original material, and it's like comes out very slowly, like it's not bombarding
Yeah,
you
they're not
every day
dropping 10
with the
things a
movie.
week on you,
Yeah,
They're
I
not
think that's what you
overwhelming you.
need to do,
I
like
mean,
you
and they
need
do
to.
put they put a lot of money into their projects,
Yeah,
but I've had this working theory now since all this information has come out that the people at the head of everything really bet hard on streaming, and it's come back to
Well,
full
yeah,
circle twice.
everybody wanted to try to catch up to Netflix. So
Yeah,
then
there
they,
was
you
that
know,
initially, and then when COVID hit, it set all of those ideas to catch up to everybody else into overdrive. And now that the dust is settled, market is settled, they've realized that they may have spent too much, and they don't they the bills have come home to roost, I guess. You know what I mean? Like
I think
they overspent.
I would like to think that in the coming years you'll see this is not a prediction, but what I'd like to happen. You'll see the studios realize that there is a market for this stuff on physical, and it makes sense to make it available. I have a friend in the replication business who says that the easiest way to put it is that people stream the content. People own and buy the content they love, and they stream the content they like.
Yeah.
And I think that's a reasonably good summary of it.
people like to own what's something they really love. They like to
Right,
have it,
that's very true.
display it. They like to know that it's always there. It's a comforting thing.
Right.
And I think
For,
that, yeah,
for
I
me,
think
actually, one of the things I like to do after I've watched a movie I really like, whether it's on disc or streaming or however it's available, is look at the behind the scenes stuff.
yeah,
And it's weird that is usually limited to the disc. It doesn't
It's
seem
not
like it.
Mm.
Right. True. Yeah. Well, I mean, like we're talking about the 2000s, they would make that value-added content just for the disc. Whereas if it was an older movie, like from the 90s, 80s, they'd have to that was when they'd make EPKs and stuff like that available as bonus content. Whereas now, I think what are they doing now for what are the studios doing? They'll make a couple of shorter featurettes. I think usually.
Yeah, they're
It's
not
usually
doing a ton.
It's usually like press package stuff. Maybe they'll
Right.
put together some interviews they did for some press people or something like that. But
Right.
when it comes to mainstream stuff, that seems to be where things are lacking. The commentaries are going away, the behind the scenes stuff goes away. It's in the boutique realm where new special features are being made, exclusive stuff with the people who were involved in the film way
Right.
back when, however many years, if they're still with us and whatnot. And I think that's the real treasure of the boutique label world,
Right.
is all of that information, the new and old stuff that's being resurrected. I mean, a lot of the labels that we covered seem to do that in droves
Right.
now, to
Yeah.
kind of
We
give you
just
that entire
finished-
package.
We just finished mastering It Follows for Second Sight in the UK.
Nice.
And I mean, that's not even an old movie. It's 2014. They added new Amos mix. The old 5.1 is the original 5.1 is still there, of course. And interviews with the cast, the crew, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's I'm sure that's why you're like, not only because you're interested in what you're doing, but I'm sure I'm assuming a fan of physical media yourself. It's exciting to be a part of that process, and so to go ahead.
It is. One of the questions we talked about was like, what's my physical media collection like? And being so busy with making the stuff, being on the other side of the fence is interesting. Most of the new physical media I have lying around my home is our office, I should say, is check discs. Whereas if it's a movie I love, like, you were asking fair moves for another one, again, early 2000s. I love Lost in Translation. I also can't articulate why. It's a more unusual choice for me, but it just something, if it strikes a chord with you, it strikes a chord. Really looking forward to seeing what Kino do with that in the 4K disc.
Yeah, because that's an older Blu-ray that needed a redoing for many years now.
It looks like an older Tellson, even intrapositive, and if they can do a good encode of a use 4K scan and negative, it should be good. Looking forward to.
That was going to be what I was going to ask you. But you read my mind. I was going to ask you
I preempted you.
Yeah, but that's awesome. I figured that's what you were going to say, is that just like what you're watching, it's hard to do all that stuff when you're in the middle. You're so busy, but also you're so involved with it. It's like it's just like our friend Mark at Orbit DVD. He owns he owns a video store. He doesn't really have a collection. His collection is his video store.
Right.
It's like it's his job. So he doesn't really collect a lot.
It counts though. Like you're technically watching these movies, just
in
a different way.
It is a little bit of a sadness, honestly. Like, I would not trade this job. I love what I'm doing, and that counts for a lot. But do you remember you've seen Cinema Paradiso, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And there's a scene where the projectionist says to the little boy, like, "Don't do what I'm doing. I'm stuck here all hours of the day in this
Yeah, yeah.
booth, like watching the same thing over and over." I won't go. I won't say I'm quite that jaded, but what I will say is that when you're watching something to look for problems and you've watched it 3 or 4 times already,
Yeah.
obviously I'm not the only one doing that. We have other staff that helps, but yeah, I don't want to be as jaded to say some of the magic goes away, but it's a very different experience to just watching something for entertainment. Sometimes I get asked, "Can you turn off?" And they can. Fortunately, the answer is yes. More so in a theater, where the presentation and everything is completely out of my hands, and that's the best way to watch a movie anyway, right? If you know, provided it's technically good. I will confess to watching movies at home. It's a little harder to get your brain out of work mode, but that's you got to take the good with the bad, right?
Yeah. But David, this has been great, man. This is I think this has been one of our most kind of technical, in-depth conversations where we've gotten a lot of like information. I think some people are going to be like, "Huh?"
Yeah.
But I think it makes it warranted to go back to listen again to maybe see if they can,
Well,
Yeah,
I feel like we only scratched the surface. Do you have any other technical questions? Any specific ones? Like, hey, why is it this way? Why does that happen?
I don't know, man. I like I said, this is an education for me. So no, I don't know that I do at the moment, but maybe we can just have you back one day and maybe
Sure.
scratch some more of that surface and
I think it's a
maybe
good good baseline here for people listening.
yeah,
At the very least, you get another look into the behind the scenes of the making of the discs that many of
yeah.
us spend our hard-earned money on or whatnot, and that kind of occupy our collections. And you understand once again that there's a lot that goes into these. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of manpower, emotion, time, energy, passion, all that kind of stuff that goes
There's
into it.
many cogs in this machine
There's
of
very many
getting
cogs in this machine because
getting one of these Blu-rays out.
yeah, David is like one cog in this large machine that gets these discs
I
to us.
I once had someone comment when I tell them what I did, and I think they understood it. They said their response was, I never considered that someone would have to do that, but it makes sense that someone does.
Yeah.
Like the movie doesn't just land in the disc.
I feel the same way about my job sometimes too. I work for Pepsi, and
Oh, really?
I have a 3-store route, and I feel sometimes like people don't think that people put this stuff on the shelf.
Right.
Like they
Like it
just
just
think
magically
like
appears.
fairies put it up, and I'm like, when they put
You mean
like
you don't have a pipe going into your home? It's property of PepsiCo. They just you don't
no,
have it on
Throw that
tap.
out there.
exactly what's going on. Or and then when I see like somebody that just pulled something off of a shelf and then put it like a couple feet down the row and not put it back where they found it, I'm like, I guess they just think nobody they don't have the energy to put it back when
I have
did
this
all this.
vision of you in the supermarket cursing them.
It's all the time. But David, once again, thank you for joining us. Would love to have you back again to talk some more. Please, if anybody wants to reach out, wants to hire you to do some authoring, if you have time for more authoring, just sure you're backed up. But any work inquiries or just wanting to chat with you, where's the best place?
FidelityMotion.com. Contact
Awesome.
us is right there. Yeah, we work with a lot of the labels. Happy to work with more.
Of course. Well, David, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.